think you all have copies of the report. It's 63 pages long with 37 footnotes, so I don't intend to walk through it line by line, nor do I intend to talk through the executive summary line by line, because I think that's 6 or 8 pages long. But what I'd like to do is to talk you through a little bit of the logic of the report, of our discussions over the last 18 months or so. We hope that this report provides a bipartisan blueprint for the Trump administration as it crafts its national security strategy. And we hope that this report contributes to the conversation within the administration as they debate different models of U.S. strategy and foreign policy. The Trump administration has been pretty clear that it wants to put America's interests first. And our overarching message is that that is best accomplished through a renovation and revitalization of the international order the United States created and led after World War II. That order consists of security alliances, an open international economy, and support for democracy, human rights, and other values as a cornerstone to the international order. So what I'd like to do is just talk you through sort of 8 very brief points that try to sort of explain our logic and where we come out. The first is that when we started this project about 15, 16 months ago, we were brought together out of a shared conviction that something fundamental was happening in the world that necessitated a rethink of U.S. foreign policy. And our primary takeaway is that of all of the different challenges and threats and issues, the most important development is the return of interstate competition, major state competition, particularly with Russia and China in East Asia and Europe, but also within the Middle East as we see that play out after the failure of the Arab awakening. And that this creates a very changed context from the 20 years after the end of the Soviet Union. This is not the only thing that's going on in the world. It's not sort of a comprehensive answer to U.S. foreign policy that needs to address all of the other sort of threats and challenges too, particularly ISIS, terrorism, climate change, but that great power competition creates a different context that really we need to grapple with, that the 45th president, whoever they turned out to be, would need to address, because it challenged some key assumptions of U.S. foreign policy after the Cold War. The second point is that we also recognize that there was growing domestic dissatisfaction with the international order, with America's global role, and that these concerns were not imagined, that they were real and that they were based in reality, that there was legitimate question marks around U.S. foreign policy, particularly because of the ambiguity about what is America's purpose, that now that the Soviet Union has gone away. Why is the United States engaged in protracted and difficult conflicts that don't seem to come to a successful resolution? And perhaps most importantly of all, the international financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, which for many people destroyed sort of the value proposition of internationalism, the notion that the international economy would work to their benefit, would work in favor of prosperity and economic growth. And so those questions are real, and those are ones I think that we have to address, and we try to address in the report, that the future of internationalism or the future of support for the international order must take those on board. The third point is that as we sort of contemplated that return of great power politics and a more contested international environment with persistent terrorism and other threats, and as we looked at the declining sort of support or increasing nationalism both in the US and around the world, and as we looked at sort of what the foreign policy choices are, that the question wasn't just about specific policies. It was also about what type of world do we want to create? What type of international order do we seek? And we concluded that there are essentially 2 different models. The first is some continuation of the post-war order, albeit reformed and renovated as we lay out. The second is a spheres of influence order in which China is much more preeminent in East Asia, has much more control of the regional order there, in which Russia enjoys preeminence in Eastern Europe, where the global economy is more balkanized and more mercantilist in orientation and less open, less universal, and where the world is sort of more contested and more nationalistic. And those are, I think, the 2 different types of international order that we could have. And which one occurs depends on the foreign policy choices that are made. So a certain set of policies might select for the first and others for the second. Both have benefits, actually, and both have disadvantages. And we need to recognize that not all good things go together. There's a price tag for each. And the question really is, which price tag are we willing to pay? Which type of future do we want to create? The fourth point is that as we looked at that choice, our view very strongly was that the United States should continue to support the post-war international order, that is a preferable outcome over sort of a spheres of influence, more sort of 19th century approach. And the reasons for that were several. The first is that the spheres of influence order is actually, or any order that's based on spheres of influence is inherently unstable, largely because the lines of demarcation are blurred. And the transition from what we have now to that model is likely to be extremely fraught and extremely difficult. There is simply no roadmap for how that could be accomplished in a stable way. And that the levels of cooperation that we see and the economic growth that we see around the world, low as it is, that all of that will be detrimentally impacted by an erosion or an unraveling of the post-war order. And so all of these questions need to be looked at relatively. It's not just the international order, good or bad, but it's relative to the alternatives. And we believe that it continues to offer strong benefits, and particularly relative to the alternative. The fifth point is that as we sort of look about how to renovate that order and how to support that order, that the question is, well, why should the US have to do all of this? How do you sort of think about American interests? And we sort of argued that we need to look at specifically what is likely to happen, not just what we think should happen. Of course, everyone should agree that if the US did less, other countries should step up. But do we expect that they will, or do we expect that there will be an erosion? And as we look at sort of the challenges to the order, what are those systemic challenges and what are sort of not systemic? There can be specific problems that seem small and marginal, like the rise of ISIS initially maybe, that actually turn out to be quite systemic and quite important. And so it's not enough just to distinguish between core and peripheral interests. We need to take a more sort of holistic approach of understanding the threats to that US-led international order. The sixth point is that our strategy, and the title of the report, which is Situations of Strength, Building Situations of Strength, is a quote by Dean Acheson from 1947, where he was trying to explain that the United States would work with like-minded countries to try to build healthy regional orders. And it was only at that point, after those situations of strength had been established, that the US could deal with adversaries and negotiate from a stronger position than maybe it would have been otherwise been the case had it started out by negotiating with the Soviet Union. And we believe that that provides for very good template for today, that the Trump administration should focus on building US positions of strength with like-minded countries in the security front to deter revisionism and to push back in East Asia, in Eastern Europe, to try to play a constructive role in building a positive equilibrium in the Middle East that transcends maybe just narrow notions of US interests, and also on the economic front that I will come back to. The penultimate point, just in terms of where we come out in the report, is that one of the very significant questions is, if the US is sort of engaged in a more geopolitically competitive world, how do you do so in a way that doesn't create a spiral of tensions? How do you do so in a way that it does preserve stability but also advance US interests? And we say very clearly that we need to recognize that there are certain occasions where the US may disagree with other powers, but those disagreements are legitimate, and the US should try to constructively engage and accommodate them in some way, and other occasions where the US should push back. And the line we draw is that when a rival power tries to change territorial borders or fundamental principles of the international order with force or coercion, the US should be uncompromising and push back quite strongly. Not in a tit-for-tat way on every single problem, but by trying to change the overall strategic situation so those endeavors fail and the international order is reinforced. On those occasions where other countries advance interests that may be opposed to US interests, but they do so in legitimate ways and through legitimate avenues, the US should be more accommodating and more constructive. And the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank or One Belt, One Road are sort of examples that we cite here. And finally, we place a great emphasis on economic power and really on the role of economic power in U.S. national security strategy. We believe that there's a lot that can be done here. The threat of a financial crisis is always on the horizon. The Trump administration needs to be prepared to have a cooperative international approach to respond to that. It needs to recognize that a strong national economy, which is a priority of the president, requires a healthy global economy. And then for all of the issues that President Trump has with the international economic order or with China or others, it makes sense to work with like-minded countries to address those problems. So whether it's Chinese state-owned enterprises or various distortions of the market or a race to the bottom, that there are ways to work with European countries, to work with allies in Asia to try to build situations of strength to negotiate collectively with China and others. So that's sort of a broad outline of where we come out. There's many specific recommendations in the report. I hope you all get a chance to read it. And with that, I will turn over to Jeff, who will lead a panel discussion. Thank you very much.